Dear colleagues, thank you for taking the time to join us at this final roundtable. I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished panel, but before I'll introduce you to people who we have invited to speak and reflect with us on challenges of plural societies, and particularly on the about the context of Moldova's pathway towards European Union integration. A very brief note, you would see that this is quite unusual panel in one specific sense. We, the organizers, have sought to ensure that there is a gender balance in all of this. And throughout our work on the program, this was our commitment to also allow sufficient space for female academics, because as you would undoubtedly know, much of the work in the academic sphere, as well as in the third sector in many countries, is done by non-male participants. So it has been our aspiration to also ensure that that voice is represented here. Regrettably, due to timetabling reasons, we were unable to ensure that. But regardless of that, I'm delighted to have the significant weight of well, significant representatives of important organs of ensuring Moldova's progress towards the European Union here with me. Janis Mažeks is EU head of EU delegation in Republic of Moldova. We have Igor Zakharov, who is advisor to the president on European integration and strategic communication, I think, as well, and Professor Stefan Wolf from University of Birmingham, UK. We have invited participants to reflect on challenges of Moldova's pathway on the EU integration. As most of you have been sitting throughout the panels in our colloquium, you would have been exposed to quite a series of conversations, both on the challenges of ensuring neutrality of Moldova in the challenging regional environment, on domestic challenges, both ethnic, social, regional, and as well on international dynamics that happen outside of Moldova proper, but have an impact on what are the preferences in this country, both in political elites and in populations. And I think the speakers here do have considerable experience in many of these areas. But what is important, I think, from our point of view, from the organizers of this colloquium, is that it is a significant time. And the reason why we have invited everyone to join us in Moldova rather than elsewhere this year has been the momentous period of time that Moldova has been invited to start accession negotiations. And that comes on the back of several years and significant progress that Moldova has been showing in its relationship with European partners, starting from deep and comprehensive trade DC, TFA agreements. Then we do have the partnership agreements into the following from in the recent developments in the war in Ukraine, in the EU solidarity with Moldova in that regard, and many smaller steps that individual member states of the European Union have been going together with this country. So there is a considerable history of westward movements in this country, both on societal and political level. And this is what I hope our panelists will be reflecting upon in their short statements. I've invited them to give a short statement of up to 10 minutes, and then we will open the floor to all of your questions and hope that there will be more of engagement with your contributions as well as theirs. Thank you. Let me pass the word to Janis Mažeks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. Since the title of the panel, I think, was the challenges on the path of Moldova's integration, I will focus mostly on the challenges. But before that, I would also like to start with the accomplishments, because the reason why we are in this room discussing the challenges of European integration now is because Republic of Moldova has been moving on the European integration path in the last 3 years at a very rapid pace. So indeed, it is amazing how much has been achieved so fast, ranging from judicial reforms to dramatic overhaul of the energy supply of the country. And this puts Moldova in a very good context, because at the risk of oversimplifying it, I would say that in Europe, everybody loves Moldova. Everybody supports Ukraine in its just war against the Russian aggression. But Moldova is not only supported, it's also loved. Because it's easy to love, because it has done many things against very difficult odds. So getting now to the challenges, I would sort them out in the external and internal ones. And on external, perhaps there are three challenges, out of which I would mention one more. Three is everything that is related to European Union and its internal processes. That's, of course, a bit outside the control here, because we are looking forward to the developments, political developments in Europe in the coming years. The accession process is not a fast one, and many of the steps that the European integration will take for Republic of Moldova do require the consensus of the member states. Second, which I will not delve into much, is Ukraine, because the launch of Moldova's candidate country status and accession process was triggered by Russia's war on Ukraine, and sympathy and support for Ukraine, and by extension to Moldova as the country that had suffered the consequences of the war disproportionately, and second most impacted country after Ukraine itself. But what I would, and of course, there is always going to be the Ukrainian context, because from the moment that Russian troops have been pushed out from Kherson, I think many Moldovans have started breathing more evenly, because there is no immediate security threat, and that is important that it is kept that way. But getting then to the external threat that I would touch a bit more, that's Russia and oligarchs. And as you know, there were several oligarchs that had been impacting the life of the country for a long time, and all of them have left Republic of Moldova. But some of them are engaged also in the politics, in the media, in the economy, also here in Republic of Moldova. Despite the much efforts being put by the government to limit the influence of the oligarchs, there is, in fact, one of the 9 points that the EU was putting forward was de-oligarchization, and we're very welcoming the fact that there is a de-oligarchization action plan in place from the government. But what we do see is that we have seen it already in the local elections last year, and I have no doubt that we will see this in the presidential elections this year, parliamentary elections next year, and the referendum this year. Both money from outside, disinformation, propaganda, hybrid threats, and that's one of the realities that is going to be there. Part of it we have just to reconcile with. We had this mildly amusing situation of Zakharov versus Zakharova, meaning my interlocutor dispelling the myths by his namesake from the Russian Foreign Ministry. But there's things that are much less amusing, like millions of euros being attempted to sneak into the country to affect the democratic process. And we see that the law enforcement agencies are doing as much as they can, but we are also trying to support them so that they are able to do it even better. And then a long list of internal challenges. One element is the necessity to ensure the sustainability of the pace of change. Because for 3 years, the country has been moving very fast forward. And when I'm asked if the goal of being ready by 2030 is realistic, I say, well, it is very ambitious, but if this pace is sustained, then it may be realistic. And even if it's not realistic, then it's better to have a ambitious goal and not meet it than have a very relaxed goal and not meet it either. But since we are facing two elections, then for the irreversibility of change, I think it is very important that this momentum is maintained. Somewhat related to that is also the importance of not cutting corners, because in this desire to achieve quick change, sometimes there is a temptation of doing things fast. And the European Union has, despite all our wish to have the momentum, has been also the voice of moderation in this respect. And if there are things that we don't like in the country, quite often it is about things being rushed. For instance, in the parliament, there is two ways of adopting legislation. One is very well prepared through the government, and the other is when legislation is tabled in the parliament itself. And quite often still there is a situation that there is very little time between the two readings, no time for engaging with civil society, no time to engage with the international partners, and as a result, the quality of the legislation suffers. Of course, the big challenge is going to be the reforms in the judiciary and fighting corruption. This has been no accident that out of the 9 steps that Moldova was asked to take by the European Commission 2 years ago, 6, one way or another, were related to the judiciary and cleaning up the corruption. And while there is progress ongoing, and from our perspective, perhaps more than from the perspective of Moldovan authorities or Moldovan people, because it has started from the top, and we have been the ones who have not expected very quick change, in fact, urging not to have too quick change. But it is important that this process continues also in the future, because after the top levels, we need to get to the lower levels as well. The elections and referendum, I already mentioned that this is going to be a challenge. And then some niche issues, perhaps. One is the importance of having adequate human resources for reforms, because this is the irony that for most countries that joined the European Union, free movement of labor started on the day of accession. Here we are in a country where roughly 1 million of the people, so at least 1/3 of the population, have free movement of labor as we speak, because they also have a EU nationality. And then the result is both a brain drain and brawn drain, and of course that affects the possibilities of the institutions to conduct reforms. And then two specific issues. One is on the communication, which, well, still there is space for improvement, including the communication with the Russian-speaking audiences. And finally, the issue of Transnistrian region. From our perspective, it is an integral part of the Republic of Moldova. We have just one interlocutor when it comes to negotiations, and that is government in Chisinau. Our preference is that the country joins the European Union as already reintegrated one, but we are not going to have the Republic of Moldova as a hostage of the situation either. So we do not exclude the possibility that first it would be the right bank joining the European Union and later on the left bank. But we are encouraged by the willingness of the government here and the interest of the de facto authorities on the other side of Dniester River to have also meaningful exchanges on the EU accession negotiations, so that also people there and businesses there can prepare for the eventuality that they would be part of the European Union, if that is the decision eventually. I would stop here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting us here today. I was having some thoughts in my mind about what to speak, but I guess if I go with my thoughts, I will just repeat what Ambassador has said mostly. So I will have to rethink how I present this stuff. I agree with the most of the things that Ambassador has already said, and indeed there are external, internal challenges. Of course, when we speak about challenges, we mainly reflect on the, let's be blank. We are speaking about Russia and Russian plans in Ukraine, in Moldova, and so on, because we see more and more attempts at the stabilization of the situation in the country, and having in mind that we are having 3 electoral exercises in the one year time frame, it's going to be more and more present in our society. But let me rethink and say a bit of the context. Look, the European integration, because we speak about the European integration of the Republic of Moldova, the war and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has created lots of crises for Moldova at once. Right after the 24th of February, we started to face refugee crisis, energy crisis, electricity crisis, economic crisis. The GDP has dropped. The inflation has risen to the just skyrocketed to the 34% in our society. Including this year. This year, our economic growth is only 0.7%. So it's complicated. It's not easy. But the war, the war in Ukraine has served also as a catalyst for Moldova's European integration, proving the fact that there is no other alternative for us other than following the path towards EU integration, because basically we see EU firstly, of course, secondly, as the economic power, but first and foremost as a peaceful project which durated for years, and that's why it's important for us. So, as you know, we have obtained the candidate status back in June 2022. That came along with 9 recommendations. In our understanding, we have fulfilled 8 of them, and according to what we're being told from Brussels, at the same time, we can already say that the 9th recommendation is also almost fulfilled. We have seen that the Superior Council of Prosecutor has just proposed a new prosecutor, general prosecutor, to be appointed to the president. So hopefully that will happen in short time. And the 9th recommendation almost reflects on the justice reform, on the judicial, as Ambassador has said. But I don't believe that anyone in this room, no one in Brussels expects Moldova to do a justice reform and to clean up the justice system in just 1 year until June. It's impossible. The justice reform is an ongoing process. It's not a linear process. It's with ups and downs, and not a single country from the eastern flank of Europe has done it super smooth. Romania, Bulgaria, they all been for 15 years of the MVC, of the process of watching after they joined the EU on the justice reform. So it's not easy. We have the precedents, but we indeed also have the challenges, as Ambassador said, and one of the challenges is Russia seeing, Russia blaming us and that we want closer relationship with the European Union, and they have started to change their narrative. They are not saying that the EU is bad because you can't really now work with these terms. They're saying, oh, well, EU is good, but it's not good for you at the moment. If you go with deeper integration in EU, if you want accession, then look at what happened in Ukraine. Do you want to happen the same to Moldova, well, go to vote for at the referendum, and yes. So the challenges are a lot, but the biggest challenge for me is losing the political momentum and the political window of opportunity. Well, it's not very often that you have a government, a parliament, a president that is a pro-European, that is genuinely pro-European. Yes, everyone does mistakes. There is no path without mistakes, but genuinely believe in this process. They are genuinely committed to being on the path of the rule of law, of the freedom of democracy. And one thing that I'm totally sure, we are not cutting corners, and we don't want to cut corners, but we want to build on the momentum, because Russia and the oligarchs are cutting all the possible corners. So if we are not as fast as them, we will lose everything. We have to protect our democracy. Democracy doesn't come with nothing. It comes with a cost, and we have to protect it. Yes, sometimes we have the elbows raised in Brussels, in other capitals, on how we are doing in Moldova, not what, but how we are doing. But as I often say, you can't dance ballet while being invited in a boxing ring by Russia Federation. You have to protect yourself. So that's what we have done. And well, I can be biased, of course, because I come from a state institution, but at the same time, if you look at the same international rankings, international indices, Moldova has done the good deal of progress. We have rolled up. Well, of course, we have been getting very good support from all our partners, from EU, from member states, from the US, and so on. But we also rolled up our sleeves and start to work. You can see that in the Reporters Without Borders, for example, we are in the 30th or the 31st place out of 180 countries, much better than half of the members of the European Union. We are between Spain and Austria. When it comes to Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, we are on the 76th place out of 180. Well, it's not the best score, of course, but given the fact that 2 or 3 years ago in 2021, we've been on the 115th place, that's a big improvement. In the gender gap global index, we are on the 19th place worldwide out of 150 countries. So I guess that speaks for itself. So basically, what I want to say, and plus I have to say, but we've been aligning ourselves closer and closer with the EU foreign policy and security, the common security and foreign policy. Our alignment rate to the sanctions and statements on behalf of the EU has increased from 60 and a bit percent to almost 86% last December. So sometimes it comes with a cost, but we are doing that because we have chosen clearly the European path of Moldova. And that's why it's gonna be a mistake for us if we don't act on this momentum. We have to do that. That's why we're organizing a referendum on EU integration later this year in October. I know that I'm pretty sure that there are many members of the EU, well, many representatives of EU member states, if I'm not mistaken, right here in the audience. So in the most of your states, the referendum took place later on in the later stage, when usually you have ended the negotiation. In our case, we believe that will be too late, because I have to be honest and to say that half of our government, even more, is now working on the European agenda of Moldova. And if the people of Moldova don't really want the European integration, we have to know, because that's human resources, that's money, that costs, that's efforts. And plus there is, of course, this narrative inside the pro-Russian oligarchs and pro-Russian voters that only Maya Sandu and PAS party wants the European integration. And perhaps we have been asked several times on several occasions in capitals in EU member states, do you actually, your people want European integration, or is that only you? And with this referendum, we want to demonstrate and to kind of to split one challenge apart. And we don't want to have this challenge. So this referendum that will come in several months is very important for us, because it will clearly show up the direction where our people want to go. And I truly hope that you, the academia, the member states inside the European Union will be able to help us in explaining the benefits, in explaining how you dealt with the EU accession in order for us to be more easy, for us to be easier to explain to our own population why we need the EU. And of course, you also had your own challenges. So any feedback, any sharing of the best practice is very welcome on our side. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, the problem being the last speaker on such a distinguished panel of experts is that I really can't add anything, but what I will say differently. So you'll hear the same thing, but just framed and structured slightly differently. So I think I agree with pretty much everything what my two predecessors have said. So I would also say there are three main challenges that Moldova is facing. So the first one is the integration process itself, which includes, again, just repeating what has been said, the EU internal dynamics of actually agreeing that Moldova should be admitted. But then on the Moldovan side, the enormous challenges associated with the adoption of the acquis communautaire. Then we have domestic challenges to the European integration agenda in Moldova itself, and then all the external challenges that, again, also have been already mentioned at quite some depth. Now, all of these different challenges are, of course, interconnected, so you can't separate them, I think. You can't see them in isolation. So the adoption of the acquis, I think, will exacerbate some of the domestic challenges, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. But that in turn then will also make the adoption of the acquis itself more difficult. And then the external challenges that we have, and including here in particular also the external challengers of the pro-European agenda, they will then leverage these domestic challenges to make EU integration more difficult. But also, and again, we have to be, I think, well, we all are aware of how widespread Russian efforts are at destabilization. We also have to bear in mind that, I mean, Russia also can potentially exercise leverage through manipulating EU internal divisions. So, I mean, just look at Hungary and Slovakia, and then wait with bated breath for whatever the European elections in June might return in terms of a parliament. Now, domestically, and this is, I think, where I'll spend most of my remaining few minutes here for this contribution. I think domestically, Moldova has for a very long time suffered from a lack of social, political, institutional, territorial cohesion. So social or problems with social cohesion, I think you could sort of pin on ethnic, linguistic, urban, rural, rich, poor, local diaspora divisions that have existed for a long time and are not necessarily in any way connected to some of the more recent developments, whether that's the war in Ukraine or anything that preceded it. Politically, I think Moldova is challenged by a highly fractured and increasingly polarized political party spectrum. We have very exclusivist narratives, and there is, in my view, a lack of a common ground on feasible national identity narrative that would actually extend beyond, let's say, the 50% plus one that you might be hoping for. Institutionally, I mean, there's still an enormously problematic legacy of what used to be called the captured state in Moldova. This is particularly obvious, I think, in the judicial system, but I would also say there are lots and lots of blockages across other institutions in the country. Therefore, I think that the pathway to the necessary legal reforms that you would need in order to get actually the adoption of the acquis underway is difficult, to say the least. And I'm particularly concerned about the need for future constitutional change in Moldova, where anybody who has read the constitution to the end, including, I think it's paragraph or article 142 onwards, I just don't see how you could get a constitutional amendment passed under the existing rules. And you can't change the existing rules because they are part of the constitution. So moving on swiftly, territorial challenges, or challenges to territorial cohesion. I think the most obvious one here is Transnistria, and more recently, and I would argue at the moment, potentially the more dangerous one pertains to Gagauzia. But we should also not forget that there are other regional identities that are or can become or can be mobilized into politically salient and divisive issues. Balti probably comes to mind here, or Taraklia. Now, these challenges, I think, have been used as strategic leverage by external actors to shape Moldova's foreign policy choices. And again, I mean, this is not a new phenomenon, so not everything is new after the Russian invasion. There has been a long history here. And with all due respect, I would say that this has been done both by Russia and the West, and has sort of exacerbated these domestic challenges because both sides have engaged in a game of competitive influence seeking that ultimately, I think, has weakened already weak institutions in Moldova, probably over the past 15 or 20 years. Now, we have also heard, and I completely agree with that, that sort of since 2020, 2021, we have had a situation here in Moldova in which there has been much more of an alignment, especially on the pro-European, pro-Western, pro-transatlantic end of the spectrum, that extends across domestic institutions, agendas, and external partners, and which also has been, I think, supported by majority public sentiment, but not necessarily massive majority public sentiment. So if you look at figures from opinion polls in terms of how popular the idea of EU integration, European membership actually is, those with some historical memory will remember that it was highest in the second Voronin administration. So the second term that the former communist president had between 2005, 6, 7, we had approval of the idea of European integration upwards of 70%. So today, depending on which opinion polls you are looking at, it's 50% plus at best. And you can also find polls where it's sort of more in the middle 30s or early 40s or low 40s. So now the majority that we therefore have at the moment, I think, is still fragile. And what's even more important is that it is being actively eroded. And I think it has every chance at the moment to diminish further. That's related to, obviously, Russian destabilization operations. At the moment, I think particularly in and using Gagauzia. There's disinformation, there's capitalizing on the cost of living crisis, the stagnating or arguably diminishing living standards in Moldova. Upcoming elections, I would say at best will result in a weaker status quo. So you might still have a pro-European president, and you might still have a pro-European parliament, but the outcome in the presidential elections, in my sort of outside view from my comfortable office in Birmingham, is going to be much, much closer than it was last time. And if Maya Sandu's party wins a majority in parliament, I don't think we'll be seeing anything like the 63 seats that they currently have. So I think low 50s if sort of the percentages work out well with the fractionalization of the political party spectrum might be possible, but I would find it very easy to imagine far worse outcomes, both in the presidential and in the parliamentary elections. The referendum, and I say that in the full knowledge of having lived through the Brexit referendum, is likely to be at a minimum highly polarizing, and I think it will entrench existing divisions further and not do much to actually heal them. I also think there is no clear path, as I said earlier, to actually implementing a positive referendum result, given the rules for constitutional amendment that we currently have. And I would add to that that the way in which the pro-European narrative is currently being framed is also one that is, because it is one that is simultaneously anti-Russian, I think it also eliminates any possibility of a more inclusive pro-European agenda that could actually incorporate those segments of the center and the center left that were supportive of the idea of European integration in the late 2000s. But then let me end on a more positive note and sort of flexibly interpret the topic of this panel, not just as challenges, but also as opportunities. So I have three opportunities that I would submit for our joint consideration here, what we can actually do about the challenges. So the first one is that European integration itself, I think, includes some of the necessary fixes, if you want, or at least the tools that are necessary to affect what needs to be fixed. So there is enormous technical expertise. I mean, it's not the first round of enlargement. There is going to be financial support. There is a framework ready, if you want, that can reshape the social, political, and economic institutions and structures of Moldova, all in a way that you could ultimately present a much more optimistic vision of the future than Moldova and Moldovans probably have had since the early 1990s. Second opportunity is, I think that European integration is a long-term and fairly open-ended, in a positive way, process that provides time and breathing space. So in that sense, I totally get the need to drive the momentum forward. But also what it means is that you actually have opportunities to tackle different challenges at different speeds. So you don't need to fix everything overnight, which then potentially invites cutting corners and all kinds of long-term detrimental processes. And finally, I would say that given the multitude of issues that need to be tackled, the expertise, resources, and time that is or are available also mean that you can actually over time build multiple and growing coalitions in support of European integration that can then actually develop a more inclusive vision of what it would mean for Moldova to be a member of the EU. And on that note, I'll hand back to Timothy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, at the beginning I was stating but it does turn out that there is a lot of potential, I think, in particularly what you emphasized at the end, Stefan, the three opportunities that we have on the ground that resolve concerns presently around. I would like to open the floor to your questions. Can I have a brief show of hands, maybe of volunteers first? We do have one for the moment. Yes. Can I, Timur, can we do the kind way and give the microphone to Anna first to let female voices be heard, if not from the panel, then from the audience first? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question. I actually don't know. I think that's to whom I want to address my question. I think that's for Igor, firstly. So according to different research, a third of population of Moldova is diaspora, right? To what extent these people will be involved in a referendum? And this first question. And the second question is a bit obvious. If you have unexpected results for you, on this referendum. What is your strategy? What are you going to do? Thank you very much.
Yeah, Moldova is a population, is a country of population of that inhabits Moldova at the moment of about 2.5 millions, and our estimation is that we have about 1 million people living abroad. Interestingly, I think Ambassador said that Moldova is a different country because many Moldovans that are living abroad are living with a European passport, mainly with a Romanian passport. So it's already kind of implementing a bit of what the EU is and basically the freedom of movement. And yes, diaspora will be very involved in the electoral exercises as they have been in the past electoral cycles. We will be opening more polling stations in the countries that have that in the last electoral exercises have participated in a larger number. That's first. Secondly, our Central Electoral Commission has already opened the pre-registration of the voters, which will give us a picture of where, I mean, in terms of geographically, in which cities to open polling stations according to the registration. So that's second. Thirdly, in the referendum, as in the presidential and parliamentary election, people from diaspora, citizens from diaspora can also take part. And we actually, last time, if you take the parliament, right? We have 101 members of the parliament, about 11, 12 members of the parliament were, I mean, I'm transferring now the percentage from diaspora into the seats in the parliament. About 12 deputies and MPs were elected by diaspora because of the heavy participation of the diaspora. So we envisage high level of voters, high level of voters in diaspora. And we are also piloting a new project, which is voting by mail. It will take place in several countries that it's more difficult for the people to move and where we don't have diplomatic representatives. Basically, it's going to be in the US, in Canada, in a Nordic country, as well as Iceland, if I'm not mistaken, but I have to check. And your second question was about if the results is not according to our expectation. First, there is a legal expectation and there is a political expectation. The legal expectation is that the referendum, turnout of the referendum is at least 33%, which makes the referendum to pass. And out of this 33%, at least 50% plus one voter is in favor of the question of the referendum. Of course, that won't be a political success, a political gaining for us if we have a 50 plus one. Of course, our aim is to have a high turnout at the referendum and then have a majority of population, 56, 57, 60, 62, 65 that will be voting for the referendum. Now, I will have to disagree and to say that there are no polls that are showing anything below 50% for the European integration. There are literally no polls. Every poll that is at the moment in the past 1 year have been showing 51 plus, 56, 55, 57, 62, 61, 67, and so on. So at least I don't know any polls that are showing anything below that. So of course we're analyzing the risk. The risk as internally are internal. I mean, the internal information that maybe I'm not sure I can disclose them. But if the population decides there is no goal for EU accession at the moment, of course, this will slow down a bit our process. I mean, we have to be realistic. I'm not sure how the Brussels or other European member states will see that. It will slow down. It will not put an end to the process, because as my interlocutor said, that it's rightly that the EU integration gives us space to breathe and take a step back if you need to take the step back. But we are no near that place to say that we want that and to say that actually that's going to happen. We are expecting the referendum to pass with good numbers.
Thank you. Stefan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Stefan Morar from the University of Montreal. You mentioned as a challenge the judicial system, and of course it is one of the biggest challenges, I think also. But I would like to know the opinion of the European Union regarding this challenge. And what I mean is that my feeling is that the vetting process is one of the biggest problem in this judicial reform. And I would like to know what's the opinion on the vetting process, if you think it was the wisest or the best way to reform it in this way. And maybe you can also give us some insights regarding the how the EU positioned itself with regards to this vetting process. What were the discussions? I don't know. Maybe you can just offer us some interesting insights from the process. Thank you.
Okay. Frankly, when it comes to vetting, the biggest problem has been communication, because it has gotten bad press. Really, especially lately, if you would Google the word vetting in Moldova, I guess the third word that would come would be scandal. And well, once you start digging deeper, then some of this is legitimate. Some of it, in my eyes, is really inflated. To give you one example, there was the supposed scandal about the chair of the pre-vetting commission, who is one of the international experts who was nominated by us, Herman van Hebels from the Netherlands, who had been involved in a similar process in Albania. In fact, that was one of the challenges in the process of finding the experts, that there are not that many examples where you would have had something similar. Because, well, normally you don't touch the judiciary because judiciary is independent, and that's why it was also important to get the process right. And well, the substance of the supposed scandal was boiling down to the fact that he, in his previous capacity as a secretary of the ICC in The Hague, had been in charge of a big reform there. And a large number of people had, during the reform, been fired, and some of them had not been happy with it. Well, show me one reform when lots of people are being fired and everybody's happy. And the other accusation against him was that he had also had other employment, contrary to the legislation. First, that restriction in legislation, really in the Moldovan legislation, was put in. But when we were in the process of nomination, we were checking to what does it apply, and the clarification was given that it applies to jobs in Moldova, which makes obvious sense because, well, then you are independent on the one hand, and you're engaged in a job in Moldova. Well, that's lots of conflict of interest that can rise out of that. In his case, it was well, he was engaged part-time in some advisory. No, I think it was as a judge somewhere outside in Moldova, which has taken place for 5 days during his mandate, and something that had been declared from day zero from the CV that was submitted to the Moldovan legislators. So it was not something that would have not been known or hidden or something like that. There are other cases where there is some legitimacy, like, for instance, there was one case when a person had passed through the vetting and it turned out that he had had a criminal case against him. From my perspective, this is not about individual, but about the system. Because if an institution that is supposed to enter in their computer registries every criminal case that has not entered some of those cases, that's not a problem of that individual, but that's a problem of the system. But these also have been the outlying cases. Like, most of the complaints about the vetting process have been that it has been too stringent, because, well, that particular judge had a good reputation, and despite the good reputation, he or she didn't pass the vetting process. Why? Because the vetting and pre-vetting was taking and now is taking into account lots of sources of information. I think they're collecting information from 14 different agencies, ranging from cadastre to banks. And so you can imagine that a lot of non-obvious things also come up. But yes, to give you one example how stringent this process was for the candidates for the Superior Magistracy Council, which was the first institution to be pre-vetted. There were 29 candidates, and it was a voluntary process, so it wasn't unlike now the judiciary, where it will be compulsory for everybody who is at a certain level to be vetted. This was by application only. So these were the people who thought that they were clean enough to pass the process. And out of the 29 candidates, 5 did pass the process. So I think that writ large, this has been one of the success stories in the making, that unlike much of Moldovan politics and Moldovan administration, it has avoided being about personalities, because even when had been questions about the individuals, some of them have resigned from the process, but the decisions which have been always transparent and available by and large have not been contested. I mean, there are some who do raise, but it's more like a general political point. Well, doesn't this really raise an issue of the vetting? So to conclude, from our side, we see that the vetting and pre-vetting is moving along reasonably well. Our expectation of the timeline was always longer than the hopes of the Moldovan authorities that it would be done quicker. And part of that slowing down is also due to internal resistance, including by mass resignations of those who are about to be vetted, which I think also speaks mostly good about the vetting process, that if people have doubts about their capacity to pass the test, they rather don't try. The internal things, no, I can't really think of any particular kitchen. What was interesting in this process perhaps was that this was one of the occasions when we had very close, and we do have very close collaboration on something that's relevant to EU integration with the United States. Because initially it was a marriage of necessity, because we didn't have the full funds to fund the whole pre-vetting process, and then the US were ready to step in. And later on it became a conscious choice. So now when it is vetting, it has been decided that we fund the part that is vetting the judges. The Americans are funding the part that's vetting the prosecutors, and both of them are benefiting, the two commissions are benefiting from the institutional memory of the pre-vetting commission, because and it was also decided that part of the experts would go one way, others would go the other way, so that they would have roughly the same experience, roughly the same standard on both aspects.
Yeah, the judicial reform, I think,
Daniel Voxler, well, big thanks for joining us after 2 days of discussing in the Ivory Tower. It's really great that we exposed the questions we were kind of, concerned with, also to decision makers. So, Stefan, I apologize if I address my question to Ambassador Majeks and Mr. Zakharov. We could think, after more than a dozen of East Europe, Central and East European countries having joined the EU, that this should be quite of a standard process. But there is one point which is completely standing out in the Republic of Moldova as opposed to any other case, and that is that you have Russian troops on the ground. And that after 2014 and 2022, we can no longer think of Russia as a peaceful neighbor. And so this is a particular challenge. And so my question, to you is, should the EU deal with the Republic of Moldova as with any other country which has joined it, without any security component which you have? Or would EU integration require that the EU also can, provide for some, or that there is a kind of, some partners of the EU providing for a security architecture for Moldova? On the one hand, for the kind of, part of the territory which is currently controlled by the government, but potentially also kind of, for the left bank, if there should be a solution to kind of, to back up.
Well, good question, complicated one. Indeed, this enlargement is not like, yeah, I will repeat myself, because I always say that this way of enlargement is not like others, and it doesn't include only Moldova. It includes almost all the candidate countries. Almost all the candidate countries have territorial problems. In the East, all the countries. In the Balkans, not all the countries, but some of the countries, right? So it shouldn't be seen as a standard enlargement as it has been back in time, or 2004, 2007, so on. Is different, and we already here touched a bit on the possibility of integration with or without. That's Transnistria. That's a long discussion. That is a discussion that again has polarized our society. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's going to be wonderful to integrate as a one country, as a recognized country, but at the same time being a hostage of 1,500, as you said, Russian soldiers is not okay. But let me tell you a thing. The Russian soldiers that are here in Transnistria is not like Russian soldiers in Georgia. It's not like Russian soldiers in Ukraine. They're more Moldovan than they are Russians. I mean, in the sense of that the situation in Transnistria is not like in other separatist region. There is long time that they can't really travel to Russia, or the Russian military can come to Moldova. Of course, we have repeatedly asked for the evacuation of the troops, and we will every time we'll do that. But as I think someone mentioned, we have actually at the moment, we have much bigger problems with other parts of the country that are controlled by the oligarchs and not Transnistria. Transnistria is a separatist region, but is more, I mean, just one thing. I think Transnistria is exporting in percentage more into the EU than Moldova and than the right bank is. In Moldova, like the territories without in control of that are controlled by the Chisinau, we export about 65 to 70% of our products and services to EU. From Transnistria, there are about 75 to 81% that are going to European Union. No one in Transnistria wants, well, publicly they may want to say that they want to go with Russia, but believe me, in internal discussion, they will be more than happy to join a union that provides them with the money, shelter, and peace. So I wouldn't worry that much about that. Of course, internationally, it's seen as a big problem. Locally, we are seeing other problems, bigger problems in other regions, but with the security, we are still kind of working with the security partnership with bilateral security partnerships. We have signed one bilateral partnership with France 2 months ago. We have signed the first country that signed a security partnership with EU, Moldova, last week. So we are working on that. We can't have the same security guarantees as Ukraine has because we are in a different situation. But of course, we will welcome, and we are working on having security agreements with most of the European countries.
Well, from my perspective, at this stage, it is a quite standard process because we will be engaging with the government in Chisinau on the approximation of legislation, on the practice. They will be the ones who will be engaging with the de facto authorities in Transnistria, which should hopefully also get the businesses there in line, at least some of the businesses which would be affected by EU standards, also ready to meet them in the future. But when it comes to the big questions of security, I think this is just simply much too early to say. Both the Moldovan government and us have said that the political settlement, because there is a discussion format 5+2, where we are as the European Union observers, that this can any discussions on the settlement can restart after the Ukrainian victory. I mean, unfortunately, this is not going to happen tomorrow. So for the time being, I would suggest that we work on the small things and worry about the big things at a later stage.
Hi, Velo Patai from the European Center for Minority Issues, and I have a question for Ambassador Mažeiks. Because we are an academic research center in Flensburg in Germany, and we're working also on the impact of EU enlargement on national minorities. So where do you see the question of national minorities in the priority list for these enlargement process? Is it somewhere, I mean, it's not something you can state numerically, but if you think about the geopolitical imperatives of some of these enlargement countries, then you get into the details like, well, Ukraine is more important than, let's say, minority issues in regards to Hungarian or Romanian populations. I know you can't speak to Ukraine, but what is your sense as a more broad, I guess, EU official, that what is the place of national minority issues? Because we know, not least from your country, from my country, Estonia, that that national minority issues were a big thing as part of it, and there was a lot of attention paid to it. So how do you see it in this round in relation to the countries in this region? Paldies.
Thank you. Well, first, my point of departure is the enlargement package of last year, where it was said that Republic of Moldova meets the Copenhagen criteria, including the criterion of human rights and respect for persons of Russian and persons belonging to national minorities. So that is the point of departure, but I guess your question is more about what else needs to be done. And there are things that are the specifics of Republic of Moldova, because, for instance, the biggest minority in Republic of Moldova is Ukrainians, if you look at the statistics. But large part of those Ukrainians are pro-Russian. So that's quite unusual for some of the perspectives. And of course, then is the question, well, which identity exactly do you protect and promote? But there are clearly things that need improvements, like, for instance, the situation in Gagauzia, where not only they don't speak the Gagauz language, but they don't speak the state language either. So right now the government has put in place a program for funding the learning of Romanian language, but I would think that it would be important also to expand in the future, not only in the context of inclusion of minorities and non-discrimination, but also to enable these people to be able to access alternative sources of information, not be in the trap of propaganda from outside. And of course, then there is the issue of dialogue between Chisinau and Comrat. And there I don't have a ready-made recipe, frankly. There is clearly that there is a need to have it, but right now it is something that is difficult to do, because much of the absence of the dialogue is self-imposed by the current Bashkan of Gagauzia and also National Assembly. So, for instance, there was the working group between the National Assembly of Gagauzia and the Parliament of Moldova, and at one point the National Assembly decided that they will suspend their involvement there. So I think it is important that the Moldovan officials do have visits there, that there is projects also from Moldovan side, as there are projects from our side in all parts of the country, so that people do not feel excluded. But at the same time, I don't interact with the Bashkan either, because if it's not clear if she is representing the Gagauz people or a convicted criminal, because she was elected from the Shore party, then well, for us it is impossible to maintain a relationship.
Can I turn this question to Igor, maybe from the state position? That would be to see where do minorities fit into the framework of the election?
Well, I think we all recognize that the EU puts an emphasis on the respecting the rights of minorities, and indeed, the EU is a place where the minorities are respected, be it ethnic or the other type of minorities. So, in my understanding, the minorities should be the first one to want the European integration, because that will be a push for the central government to respect even more their rights, even more their presence in our country. So that's my belief that's what we're trying to do. And even though we are not, as a government, the EU delegation or the EU side is not engaging also with the current Bashkan, the Bashkan, the governor, the head of the autonomy of the Gagauzia, because we do believe and we do have enough evidence that she's not representing the people, but she represents the oligarch groups. And one of the reasons is that she became known overnight. No one knew about her, and just in 2 days she became the Bashkan. But what I want to say is, but we still have very good relationship with people of Gagauzia, with mayors of Gagauzia. We do travel there quite a lot. In the last, in April, for example, both Prime Minister, President, Foreign Minister traveled to Comrade, to Gagauzia, and other cities in Gagauzia to meet the local, the mayors, the people, the students there. The EU itself is investing quite a lot of money in the Gagauzia. We've been calculating about 300 million over the past 4 years have been invested. Like, give it or take, I'm not sure, but something along these lines have been invested in the roads, in the kindergartens, in the water systems in the Gagauz region. Unfortunately, some local politicians are, are politicizing the subject of European integration, of the help that they're getting. They are, when you go to Gagauzia, you will be going on a very, very good and repaired road, which I think was one of the best in the country. People will still tell you that it's repaired through Russian money, which is not true, because it's repaired by the EU funds. Yeah, we have to find a better mechanism of interaction with the authorities and with the people of Gagauzia. But at the same time, we also shall expect, and we are expecting from the elected authorities in the Gagauzia, including from mayors, from local MPs over there, to recognize the facts and to recognize the EU is helping them much more than other actors are doing.
Sure. My name is Semijep. I'm from Central European University in Vienna. My question is for Professor Stefan Wolf. When talking about the territorial challenges, you said that at this moment you'd be more worried about a potential territorial challenge posed by Gagauzia or by belts in the north. I'm just curious why this is the case, and what form exactly do you foresee that these territorial challenges could take?
Okay, does that work? Yeah, mine is a follow. Hello, is that better? Okay. But I have looked at Ukraine and the changes they were required to make to their law on national minorities and some of the controversy over their legislation on the language of education. And I just wonder, so it's a follow-up question, but it's a lawyer's question. Are the EU looking for specific legislative changes? So changes to legislation. I don't even know if you have an act on the rights of national minorities or your language act or education act. Yeah, does that make sense?
Thanks. Hi, Alan Cooperman from the University of Texas at Austin. And my question builds on a question from Daniel and a comment from Timofey. And it regards the analogy to and precedent of Cyprus and its EU accession. At the time, you'll recall, there were negotiations underway to try and resolve that frozen conflict. And the moment of potential EU accession provided the most leverage that will ever exist for resolving the Cyprus conflict. And so professors like me who work on conflict management were urging the EU to make resolution of that frozen conflict a precondition for accession to the EU. And in our view, the EU bungled that terribly and missed that opportunity. And I will also point to the recent Nagorno-Karabakh situation. And what we see is that if frozen conflicts aren't resolved, they can become unfrozen in really horrible ways for innocent civilians. So my question is, has the EU learned this lesson, and will it do better in the case of Moldova's potential accession? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just briefly on all three perhaps questions. Frankly, especially in Balts, I don't see any element of a challenge. Just this month we had Europe Day celebrations in Balts, and very nice one. And that there were three lonely representatives of Shansa party with posters saying that the EU is a war, but that was the extent of anti-EU sentiment. On national minorities legislation, there's nothing at this stage in the pipeline. And finally, on the Cyprus analogies, I wouldn't draw any analogies at this stage, even less so with Nagorno-Karabakh, because Transnistrian region is very much different from anything that you associate with when you speak about frozen conflicts. People commute to work from Transnistria to Chisinau on a daily basis, which I didn't see in Cyprus, and I am very sure that nothing like that would happen in Nagorno-Karabakh. The DCFTA applying to the Transnistrian region is there. We are having our confidence building projects on both sides of this river. Some of them are, well, exactly called confidence building measures, that they bring people together, and they do bring people together on a regular basis. So describing it as conflict is a bit of a misnomer, except for the fact that it's a territory that it's not controlled by the constitutional authorities, but setting it as the resolution as precondition, from my perspective, it would be a very bad idea, because if the EU was to say that unless you resolve the conflict, you will never be accepted in the European Union, well, guess what? That gives very huge leverage for Russian Federation, because that's where you're saying that if you really want to prevent Moldova to become a EU member, all you need to do is keep those 1,500 people there, or alternatively, you can also have a very long list of demands that perhaps wouldn't arise otherwise from the de facto authorities, what things they would want in order to lift their leverage. So, I mean, this is something to be discussed at later negotiations, but that's why we are not setting it as a precondition.
Thank you. I will try also to answer the questions, but also kind of concluding the remarks. From what I have heard in the audience, so yeah, indeed, some of the challenges that we've been discussing, and it seems that we all agree that separatism is a challenge and Transnistria is a challenge, but it's a challenge that it's too soon to speak about, firstly, and it's a challenge like no other frozen conflict. Sorry. So Transnistria is a different case, should be analyzed in a different lenses. Yeah, it's absolutely different, and I don't think we've been actually very looking forward to what the EU has been saying, that about the Transnistria and Moldova's succession, without being a hostage with a Russian group or something like that, because, well, in our opinion, I have to agree that if EU says something like, we are not accepting countries until they resolve their conflict, that will be a total kill for the European enlargement, for the next European enlargement. I mean, just look at other countries. So we don't want that. Minorities. So no problems here in Moldova with minorities. Everything is good. We don't have requests and recommendations from the EU to make the situation better, because, well, honestly, the rights are recognized, the languages are respected. The problem is indeed is in there, because there are minorities that don't speak either their language. So, I mean, I'm not sure if you can call yourself a Gagauz minority if you don't speak your language. You only speak Russian language. If you go down Gagauzia, I'm sorry, but you'll hear Russian and you'll not hear Gagauzian. And there was a question about Cyprus. No? Okay. So I will just not answer that question, but I will have to say that there are indeed lots of challenges, but I like how the professor has framed it. These challenges brings numerous opportunities, and the war in Ukraine have brought to Moldova numerous crises, but also have brought to Moldova numerous opportunities, because we started to be seen in the international arena as a country that is open, that a country that is democratic, that can a country that can fulfill their promises. And I do believe that these challenges that we are having right now will be actually in a bit of time will be seen as opportunities. And I hope that European integration will also serve as a catalyst and opportunity to solve the unresolved conflict of Transnistria. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I can actually say something different / controversial. I didn't mean to suggest that Baltia or Taraklia would be sort of the next frozen conflicts, Russian-controlled territories. I think there is potential to mobilize regional differences into something politically salient there. It's a potential. It's something I think one should recognize, but not overact the pudding and say, oh my God, there's sort of two more de facto states looming on the territory of Moldova. I think the point that I was trying to make was that if you look at the interest structures of the, whatever you want to call them, the elites, the competent authorities, they are very different in Gagauzia and in Transnistria. And in Transnistria, as we have heard on multiple occasions, they are much more aligned with the European agenda than they are in Gagauzia at the moment. I mean, there's like 1,000 things that you could say actually that if you offered a halfway reasonable deal to Transnistria, this conflict could actually be resolved now in a fairly stable way. Now, the contradiction that I see also partly in terms of what was expressed here, I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't say on the one hand that it's all different and it's all good and it's really not a problem, but we will not give sort of Transnistrians a veto, so to speak, and say, well, basically you can integrate as Moldova without Transnistria. So, I mean, it can be either this or the other. And on top of that, you shouldn't say, in my view, the conflict can't be resolved until the war in Ukraine is over, because that, in a way, delegates the leverage over the conflict resolution process to an actor who has absolutely no interest whatsoever in resolving this conflict. So again, looking at it from an opportunity perspective, I actually think that played well, you might have an opportunity over the next 12 to 18 months, provided that the presidential and the parliamentary elections aren't a complete disaster in terms of their outcomes, to actually make real progress on at least kickstarting a process that would be, it might not be the 5+2 or the equivalent, but you could actually have, basically you could capitalize on the positive momentum that I think currently exists or has existed in terms of managing what could have been a very bad crisis with Transnistria since 2022, and really sort of mobilize that. Cyprus analogy, I think the EU didn't screw it up as badly as you suggested, Alan. Yes, right, there you are. Because I mean, what would have been the alternative? To say no, and then I'm sure Greece would have been delighted to accept, yeah, Cyprus can't integrate, but the other 9 can. So talking about the internal challenges of the integration process, I think this is where the analogy lies. You might have veto players in the EU that could actually prevent Moldovan or Ukrainian accession that may or may not have anything to do with the conflict in Transnistria itself. So I think from that perspective, the problem was not that the EU said Cyprus can integrate without the North, but that the alternative would have been to potentially completely derail the big enlargement in 2004, because in my view, the challenge was a Greek veto. If Cyprus could not have or would not have been allowed to integrate. So I think from that perspective, the analogy is very different. And also, let's not forget, I mean, it wasn't the people in the de facto state that didn't want to. I mean, they were happy to accept what was on the table. It was whatever sort of, I mean, the Republic of Cyprus that said, no, actually, no thanks. So again, I think, I mean, the analogy is, I think, still there, but it may work at a slightly different dynamic. The final point I want to make, because I've, again, heard it several times in the discussion here, there are no 1,500 Russian soldiers in Transnistria. The actual number of real Russians is probably below 100. That's mostly sort of the senior officers. The rest of them are all multiple passport holders. So local Transnistrians that have been conscripted into whatever you want to call these structures that also happen to have Russian passports. So we do not need to think of a scenario here where we suddenly have to ship 1,500 Russian soldiers back to Russia. It's a very small number. That doesn't mean that there aren't huge challenges in terms of the security structures that exist in Moldova and what you actually do with them should it ever come to reintegration. But I mean, that's, keep it real in terms of what the actual numerical challenges are here. So Right, I think I better stop.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Igor, and thank you, Yanis. I think with the final word being spoken by Stefan was I think the only useful reminder that I can pass on to from all of our discussions is that we have been engaged in conversations around practical, normative, and ideational issues. And with this roundtable, much more of a practical implications hopefully has been set into our minds when we embark on a travel, well, to Gagauzia first tomorrow, yeah, some of us, but then back to our respective home institutions and countries where we live. Yes, correcting myself now. So thank you everyone for your questions in the audience and your interest, and thank you, the three panelists. Stefan? It was a delight to have you around, and it was an important contribution that you three have made to this 2 days of intensive conversations we have had. Thank you everyone for traveling to Moldova, and I think with all these debates and discussions on Moldova's perspectives, about Moldova's past and present experiences, challenges and opportunities, it will be also useful for you to return to your research agendas wherever and whatever you do. Thank you for coming over to IPSA Research Committee's colloquium. On behalf of the organizers, thank you.